there's been some really good biopics. So you may have heard there was the Michael J. Fox movie called Still, which is a
I saw
documentary
him
about
doing
him.
press for that, talking
That
about he wasn't friends with Christopher Lloyd till the third movie, and how he turned into a major alcoholic after he got Parkinson's.
Well, he definitely had some issues, and it's a very Davis Guggenheim is the director. Who I don't know if you ever saw the documentary "It Might Get Loud," which is a great rock doc with Jack Black, or no, with what's his name from the White Stripes, Jack White,
Jack White, yeah.
And also it's Jimmy Page and The Edge. It's a great doc. Anyway, Davis Guggenheim talks to Michael J. Fox, and they intersperse a lot of his clips from his movies. Really candid and sort of sobering and sort of sad about his Parkinson's. I mean, he developed it when he was in his late 20s. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, to have that, and, you see him with his therapist and, his physical therapist trying to help him walk. You see his wife, Tracy, who's been an amazing sort of support. He's got 4 kids. It's a really powerful doc. I also saw the biopic about Little Richard, which is really an amazing ride. I mean, if you think you know anything about Little Richard, you don't, because the stories and what happened through his life. I mean, just such a character. And then also
not only on
Shields.
top of that, 2 things I want to touch on. One, I think that's great with the documentary on Little Richard, because they'll show how influential he really was on rock and roll. Not just his like outlandish personality, which that's how I got to know him as a child in the 80s and 90s. Right. But really, like, he was so ahead of his time as a performer and a musician, and it goes beyond Rudy Tooty. And then back to Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox was such a big deal that I just recently found out or remembered that he had two top grossing movies at the same time. It was 1 and 2. It was Back to the Future and Teen Wolf. All came out within 2 weeks of each other, and it was both number 1 and number 2 consecutively for fucking months, right? So him getting Parkinson's at literally the peak of his career, there was nobody hotter in the 80s than Michael J. Fox.
Yeah.
So
And it's interesting because as he's talking about his diagnosis and how he sort of had to hide it from the world, only his family and his doctor knew, because, he was young. I mean, you're right. He was the peak of his career. And they do sort of a montage at one point where Michael's talking about how he would have these sort of tremors in his left hand. So if you watch, and they did like a big clip of this, a master clip of all these shots of him. And he said, I'm always holding something in my left hand to disguise the fact that I had these tremors. So they do this cut of him like in Spin City and, all these things, all the movies, everything he was doing for the first like 5 or 6 years before he came out as having Parkinson's, just doing everything he could possibly do. He was popping all these pills to, sort of even him out. And I mean, it's a staggering story, and very, he's so just present, and it's so powerful to see this guy just sort of own it. And I will say the other thing, I just blew my mind. His foundation has raised $2 billion for research for Parkinson's.
Yeah. That's
great.
Great.
Who else can
That's
say
great.
that they've had a disease, a public figure, and it's had that kind of impact on research? Nobody.
No, it's huge, and he'll go down in history as a pioneer, and hopefully somebody who could prevent other people to suffer through that. And luckily, he had the resources and a loving wife to stand by his side through all of this. But yeah, it's an amazing and very heartbreaking story of the legacy and life of Michael J. Fox. Trip.
So the other one that was interesting, the other biopic, sort of the third leg of the stool, is the Brooke Shields documentary, which, again, anybody who sort of grew up in the 80s, would remember Brooke Shields was ubiquitous. I mean, between the Blue Lagoon and, everything that she did, she sort of has had all these lives, like she was written off, because she was like too like, oh, her mom's like a pimp, and she's pimping around in all these movies where she's naked, and then the Calvin Klein ads.
Wasn't she naked in Blue Lagoon as a minor?
She was topless. Yeah, they had a body double for the other stuff, but yeah, she was 15, but she was 12 or 11 when she was in Pretty Baby, the Louis Malle movie about the whorehouse in New Orleans, the turn of the century. With Susan Sarandon, which was sort of the first big film of her career. And, it's a very interesting documentary because, you get to see somebody warts and all and hear about their whole, their whole career path and how they were, sort of taken advantage of. And the big takeaway from the Brooke film too is that she was actually raped when she was, probably like 18, 17 years old by some guy in a hotel room. And, it's just this whole sort of idea that everybody felt like she was theirs, right? She was ubiquitous. She was everywhere. She was on TV, she was in movies, she was a big model, and there was not really a bigger face than hers. And so it's pretty interesting the way that she's actually come out the other side. It's these survivors. That's what's so interesting to me, not the people that succumb, but the people that, what was their coping? How did they get through,
Right,
what they went through?
And she was still dealing with a lot of issues going into her adulthood, which, was obviously spotlighted through paparazzi efforts. So it's a cautionary tale that hopefully has changed a little bit of the industry, but I feel like it hasn't changed enough, right?
Yeah, no,